In the Valle case, the jury came back with a not guilty verdict. At the time, I said it was probably due to the intent issue. Now a juror has spoken out. Hi, Tony DeWitt here. I'm a Missouri appellate attorney, retired, and I bring you a fresh perspective on the law without offering any legal advice. So pull up a chair. This is what we're discussing today. Jurors are given jury instructions by courts in order to interpret the law so that they can find the facts that will guide the judge in applying the law. They have to find the facts in order to reach a determination as to whether someone is guilty or not guilty. But in order to do that, they have to understand what the law is and what facts the law requires them to find. Jury instructions can be very clear or they can be as clear as mud. But you would think on the more serious issues like murder that they would be relatively clear. I think in this particular case, Connecticut has done a pretty good job with their model criminal jury instructions, and I like what they've done, and I want to show you that right now. This is the model jury instruction for murder in Connecticut, and it's based on Section 53A-54A, sub A, which is in the Connecticut statutes, the general statutes of Connecticut. It says it was revised last in 2007. The defendant is charged in Valle's case, it was count 1, with murder. The statute defining this offense reads in pertinent part as follows. A person is guilty of murder when, with intent to cause the death of another person, he or she causes the death of such person or a third person. The reason intent is necessary is because we have to have a mens rea. You can't just have an accident be the reason for someone's imprisonment for causing the death of another person. There has to be some intent behind it, or it has to specifically result from some other factor like intentional willful negligence, that sort of thing. So the court in Connecticut then goes on to explain this first element, intent to cause death. The first element is the defendant specifically intended to cause the death of another person. There is no particular length of time necessary for the defendant to have formed the specific intent to kill. A person acts intentionally with respect to the result when his or her conscious objective is to cause such result. The intent to cause death may be inferred from circumstantial evidence. It goes through all of the other particular options that the court has, like causing the death and conclusion. It says, in summary, the state must prove beyond a reasonable doubt that 1, the defendant intended to cause the death of another person, and 2, in accordance with that intent, the defendant caused the death. If unanimously you find that the state has proved beyond a reasonable doubt each of the elements of the crime of murder, then you shall find the defendant guilty. On the other hand, if you unanimously find the state has failed to prove beyond a reasonable doubt any of the elements, you shall then find the defendant not guilty. That is actually much more clear than the murder instruction that was given in Karen Reed's case. I think they've done a pretty good job with this instruction, and I have been pretty well impressed with the jurors in some of these cases being able to read the instructions and actually apply them. A lot of people were sort of flummoxed when this came out and the verdict was what it was. In this case, it was not guilty because they thought that they had proved pretty conclusively that he had caused the death of Miss Jimmy McGrath. And again, I'll say this again, my heart goes out to the McGrath parents. I thought the father of Jimmy McGrath handled it very well outside the courthouse, and that speaks a great deal to his character. He is a man of character, and I have great respect for him. He suffered a terrible tragedy, and instead of mindlessly striking out the way many people do in this situation, he has come in and said, okay, the jury has made their determination. Well, as you might imagine, in Connecticut, there has been a big buzz about how did this happen? It seemed like such a miscarriage of justice when, in fact, it was actually the carriage of justice because that's what they followed the instruction and they got the right result. How do we know they followed the instruction? Well, because one juror has spoken out. And here's what he said.
They just didn't have enough to prove the case.
Juror Jim Stuhlman says the prosecution didn't come close to proving Raul Valle intended to kill Jimmy McGrath, that the easiest decision for the jury was on the murder charge.
There was so much inconsistencies and contradictions. Not everyone will be happy with the conclusion. We weren't happy that we couldn't on the final counts. But I think we did everything we could have to get as far as we did.
The jury agreed unanimously on the most serious charges, murder, manslaughter, and assault, but were hopelessly deadlocked on the lesser charges, reckless manslaughter and reckless assault, the judge ordering a mistrial on those charges. Stuhlman claims the jury didn't even discuss self-defense. Their decisions had everything to do with the prosecution failing to prove intent.
He believed very strongly that they did not prove their case. And as a result of that, he believed that it was very easy for them to reach the verdicts on murder and manslaughter and that sort of thing. The only one they couldn't reach a verdict on was the verdict for reckless conduct. And I think he indicated he felt bad about that, and I'm sure the other jurors did as well. He went on to say this.
They sent us back in, and again, we talked, we reconsidered things, and some people, and no one compromised and voted on something they didn't really believe in. And so the changes that happened were really for the right reasons.
Was that the case for you? Did you end up changing your mind?
Yeah, a couple of times.
You did?
Yeah.
And why was that?
Just initially after hearing, it could be just the definition of a word. One word can change the meaning of something, and so there was so much to consider. You know, what we saw, what we remembered, what we didn't.
The defense team only calling one witness, Raul Valle himself.
That was the emotional part, and I'm glad he did testify because it gave a different perspective.
And despite the facts of this case,
there was no question that the elements they proved, he did that. He had a weapon, and he did stab 4 people.
Stuhlman said jurors had more to consider when looking at sending a man to prison for more than 100 years.
It was all about, did the prosecution prove every element of the charge? And we just felt they didn't.
When I asked Stuhlman about his message to the victim's family,
I hope they understand that even though they might disagree with what we concluded, that we really did the best we could. And we tried to follow the rules and the law and apply that just the way we should have.
And I should point out that he talked to 2 different television stations. It wasn't like either one of them had an exclusive on this. So he basically says they did not prove the intent element, and that's what I thought they were probably going to do from the get-go. And the reason I thought that is because Valle came in and said, I was just trying to get out of there. I was slinging that blade back and forth. I wasn't trying to kill anybody. I was just trying to get away. And again, he did a pretty good job of painting the picture of exactly how chaotic and how violent that fight was. And there is this thing called disparity of force, and it was a disparity of force situation. These guys had, 10 feet and 10 boots kicking him, and he had 1 knife. And unfortunately, somebody lost their life. What was interesting to me about the jurors' comments was that he did not believe that they ever talked about self-defense in this case because they never proved the intent element. And again, this goes back, in my mind, to the issue of overcharging defendants. You charge them with murder so that you can force them to take a plea deal to something lesser than that. But I think in this case, the McGrath parents wanted the murder charge, or other people wanted the murder charge, I'm not sure which, and because of that, the state did not offer what I would call a reasonable plea deal to a 20-year-old kid. They offered him what amounts to all of his productive life in prison, and that's not a deal that you can make, and so he did the right thing in going to trial. This was an interesting case from a number of viewpoints, but the fact that the juror has come out and said, this is what we thought, and that he had changed his mind during the course of deliberations, that he'd listened to other people and changed his mind. That's the way juries are supposed to act. So, in my opinion, again, it was a pretty good result. That's what I have for you. That's what I have for you today. I hope you found it helpful, interesting, or maybe both. If there's a subject you'd like me to discuss, please feel free to send me an email at the address above. If you like what we do, please feel free to subscribe and come on back to the beach tomorrow. I release videos every weekday, weather and work permitting. If you have the opportunity today, do a kindness for your fellow man. It makes the world a better place, one kind act at a time. And now, YouTube has some suggestions for other videos of mine that you might like.